Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to go over the patch to developers for April 2022 in the ground vehicles section in this video. And also just to remind you, when it comes to the sales, this is basically the last day that you can get the discounted packs when it comes to the ones which are being removed. So the Type 69 2G, the Pyramirski, the MiG-17AS, the SAV-20, the OF-40 Mark II MTCA, and the starter packs are all 50% off for basically another day. So if you want any of those, it's worth picking them up now because they're going to be removed from sale after this sale, apart from the starter packs, of course. So yeah, if you're making a decision, make sure to make it today. Anyway, let's get into the patch to developers. The first vehicle is a really interesting one from the Germans. It is the Borgward 4B PZJ Wanze, and this vehicle is definitely an interesting one when we have a look at its stats. Basically, during the Second World War, the Wehrmacht used 3 remotely operated demolition tanks. They used the light Goliath that you'll know about, the medium Springer, which was the SDKFZ 304, and then the heavy Borgward 4, the SDKFZ 301. The Borgward 4 was the largest of the vehicles and the only one capable of releasing its explosives before detonating. The 2 smaller vehicles were destroyed when their explosive charges detonated. The Borgward originally developed the B4 as an ammunition carrier, but it was found unsuitable. It was also tested as a remote minesweeper, but was too vulnerable to mines and too expensive. During the Battle of France, German engineers from the 1st Panzer Division converted 10 Panzer I AuFBs into demolition and mine-clearing vehicles, using them to place time charges on bunkers or minefields without losing the vehicle. The Waffenamt found the idea valuable and ordered the B4's development as a remote-controlled demolition vehicle. The first vehicles were delivered in 1942. The Borgward 4 was much heavier than the Goliath and carried a much larger payload. It was operated by radio, and the Goliath was wire-guided. Due to the Borgward 4's much longer range, a driver in the vehicle would bring it independently to its destination before dismounting and conducting it to its target by radio. When it reached the target, the vehicle would drop the charge and leave the danger area. This put the operators in great danger. And while the vehicle was armored, its armor was inadequate by 1942-43 standards, and its larger size than the Goliath made it much easier to spot. The more interesting overall is the last variant, which was near the end of the Second World War. Approximately 56 AuFBs and Cs were converted to the Jager Wanze, armed with 6 RPZB-54-1 anti-tank rockets. And in the last days of the war, these vehicles fought some minor skirmishes against Soviet armor and saw some action at the Battle of Berlin. In March of 1945, the Germans decided to use the base of the SDKFZ 301 Borgward 4 like a tank destroyer, and to be done, they would add 6 rocket launchers, Panzerschreck launchers, to it. The vehicle was quite discreet, it was quite small, and also very powerful in this little role. It could destroy IS-2s at close range, and logically, because of its rockets of 3.3 kilos each, they could pierce 220 millimeters of armor at 200 meters. The tank counts more on its discretion and its speed of 40 kilometers an hour to escape instead of its armor, which was around 20 millimeters and 8 millimeters on the side, but it also had 3 smoke grenades to be able to help it escape. So overall, a pretty interesting little vehicle, this one. Definitely one which I could see as an event vehicle in the game. For the Soviets, we have the BA-10M, which is an upgrade of the BA-10. This started its life in the late 1930s, where Soviet armored fighting vehicles designers decided to use sloped armor in its new designs, and redesigned some already made vehicles to take advantage of this. The BA-10 armored car was built on the Gaz AAA 6-wheel truck chassis, which was a near copy of the Ford Timken design, albeit with an extra axle. It had been modified and reinforced to cope with the extra weight that an armored car would require, and the use of a front-engine chassis placed the driver behind the engine, and there was a co-driver's machine gun position beside him, which would be more useful in frontal engagements. The power was provided by a 50 horsepower Gaz M1 4-cylinder water-cooled petrol engine that gave a maximum speed of 55 kilometers an hour and a range of 300 kilometers an hour, which was highly useful for the heavy scout role. Being a heavy armored car, the vehicle was not always best suited for off-road, but a pair of tracks for the rear wheels was given for crossing bad terrain. The BA-10 used a slightly thinner, better sloped armor layout than the BA-6, and the improved protection while saving weight as the sloping increased the effective armor. The majority of BA-10s seen in photos are actually BA-10Ms. The original BA-10, which was the BA-6M, only saw very limited production at the Izhora factory in April of 1937. However, it seems as though, when being serially produced, a number of changes were made. There were plenty of internal wiring changes and other unseen changes, such as the engine spark plugs being placed in a shielded box. Fuel tanks were also placed under the roof, ammunition capacity was reduced, and a new whip antenna was added. In action, they saw it all in Soviet military operations from 1939 to 1940, such as the invasion of Latvia. The BA-10 was also deployed on the Eastern Front during the Second World War, but was rarely seen after the winter of 1941 to 1942. It was usually used as a heavy scout, but it began to lose its role in 1942 to Lend-Lease vehicles, as well as stuff such as the T-60 and also the T-70. These vehicles had lost their original role to the T-34, which was now being heavily mass-produced, and could therefore be relegated to minor roles such as the heavy scout role. Some BA-10s were, however, seen in Leningrad as late as 1943. Despite its weight, the BA-10 was a reasonably reliable vehicle, and despite the limitations of its 6x4 drive, served the Red Army well until the German invasion of 1941. And after 1941, few Soviet armored cars survived the early battles with the German Wehrmacht, and those that remained in Soviet hands were withdrawn from frontline service after 1942, although many would be stripped down to be used as armored personnel carriers. This machine had access to a 45mm cannon, along with two DT 7.62mm machine guns. The armor was only at most 15mm, and also it could go a max speed of 55 kilometers an hour. Japan gets an interesting vehicle, a close combat vehicle, as it is known. This was basically a prototype which was designed with some interesting ideas, such as the 40mm CTA, which was a 40mm cannon, which used cased telescoped ammunition, which is pretty interesting. It could fire APFSDS and also some pre-scored fragment shells, and it could fire 10 clips in 0.8 seconds. This thing was an incredibly rapid-fire gun. At the same time as well, when it comes to the vehicle itself, it was not put into service, but a lot of the ideas from it helped sort out vehicles in the future. Basically, the close combat vehicle was planned to replace the Type 89 FV and the Type 87 RCV, but the vehicle itself was not adopted. Instead, what ended up happening was the Type 16 MCV and also a series of wheeled armored personnel carriers. The Kais eventually got adopted instead, but Komatsu failed to build a prototype of the wheeled APC Kai, and therefore the project got cancelled. So therefore, the only one which actually got through was the Type 16. But a lot of the ideas when it comes to the close combat vehicle were used in future, at least models. There were three types of projects that were actually built. You had the maneuver combat vehicle, which became the Type 16, which we all know. Then you had the fire combat vehicle, which became the wheeled 155mm howitzer. And then the close combat vehicle, which is this one right here, this 8-wheeled behemoth, which is definitely not small at all. as a general vehicle. But yeah, it could be kind of interesting to see. It is really modern, so the information about it is definitely sparse, but at the same time, it's at least interesting enough to have a look at, especially with that gun, which would be incredibly deadly. The Chinese tech tree would get something similar in the form of the CM34 30mm 8x8 wheeled IFV. This is a Taiwanese IFV armed with the 30mm Bushmaster II. Basically, the CM34 is based on the CM32 APC family. It's armed with the 30mm Bushmaster II chain gun manufactured by Northrop Grumman, and it has a crew of 3, including the commander, driver, and gunner. As an IFV, it can also carry 6 infantry in the rear cabin if needed, and the vehicle is powered by a 450 horsepower Caterpillar C12 diesel engine with an MD4560P gearbox from the Allison Engine Company, which has 6 forward gears and 1 reverse. It has a top speed of 105 km an hour. Protection-wise, the baseline armor of the CM34 is constructed from high-hardness steel, like the US Striker, with 12.7 API resistance from the front and 7.62 resistance all around. In addition to this, the combat-ready CM34 is also equipped with bolt-on ceramic armor, which offers all-round protection against 12.7mm armor-piercing ammunition, and artillery fragments from 155mm rounds, with the front being able to withstand 25mm APDS rounds from 1 kilometer away. The CM34 was designed to counter PRC's amphibious and airborne AFVs, light tanks, low-flying drones, and infantry on quick response, which can be done with Taiwan's road network throughout the island. The CM34's top speed of 105 km an hour on road and precise weaponry would be able to do this. It was first revealed in 2015, with prototype versions being displayed in 2017, and full production of it starting in 2019. The Italians get a familiar vehicle in the form of the Tiger from Germany. Now, the post goes through all of the different communications about getting the Tiger into Italy and who it was going to be used by, and there's a lot of very useless information here. So I'm going to sum it up very quickly. There is a Tiger tank that was used with the Italians for training purposes mainly, and there you go. That's all you need to know. It's got an 88mm, it's got 2 7.62s, it's the standard Tiger you all know and love. The French get the AMX-10C, which is a tracked version of the AMX-10RC. The turret was the same as the wheeled variant, still armed with the 105mm BK Mecha, now with 40 rounds. The hull was completely new though, not taken from the AMX-10P, but the track, suspension, and wheels were a copy of the AMX-10P. The armor was designed to resist not only to small weapon fire, but also some heavier caliber stuff, often used in IFVs such as 23mm from the ZSU-23. The tank was also amphibious and could reach a speed of 62 km an hour. The tank also weighed 14.5 tons, but the prototype wasn't accepted into production because the AMX-10RC and AMX-10P were already both in production, and the French army considered there was no need for a tank that would have the off-road mobility of the AMX-10P and the firepower of the AMX-10RC, while they could simply upgrade the AMX-13. The tank was tested in 1974 to 1975, and then it was rejected, with the only prototype now being in the Saumur Tank Museum. So very similar to what we have when it comes to the 10RC, just with a different hull attached to some tracks. The Swedish get another variant of the CV90-105. This is the XC8 version relating to its turret, but we might as well talk about the whole history of the CV90. It was born out of a desire to have a vehicle that was capable of high mobility, high survivability, and also having decent protection. A group was formed of representatives from the Swedish Army and a couple different companies to settle down and find a vehicle to fit the bill. This was a task the Swedish engineers were keen to tackle, as creating such a vehicle would mean it could be used for anti-aircraft and anti-tank roles, something the Swedish Army have always been wanting. To do this, the vehicle would have to be easily modifiable to suit different needs, and in 1985, the STRF-90 group finalized the design for this new vehicle, with prototypes of the CV90-40 and the CV90-25 ordered the following year, armed with a 40mm cannon and a 25mm respectively. Hägglunds built the hull while Bofors was responsible for the turret. HB Utveckling AB was responsible for development. The CV90-25 was dropped and development of the CV90-40 continued, and a particularly difficult area was improving reliability, something that had been relatively easy for the IKV-91. The first 4 prototypes used the clutch and braking steering system, while a 5th one used the X300 transmission, which was used on the Warrior IFV. This latter prototype, due to it being 35mm higher than the clutch brake system, had a raised engine hatch. But this aside, the first 4 prototypes all had the same turret fitted, that of the famous 40mm Bofors. Deliveries of the vehicle would finally begin in 1994, and since then a large number of variants have been created from the CV90, and not just in Sweden either. The Netherlands, Switzerland, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Estonia also use the CV90. One of the variants of it is the CV90-105XC8. This is a version fitted with a 105mm gun turret from Cockerell of Belgium. There was a previous attempt similar to this with Giat of France developing the CV90 with its TML-105 turret. However, both vehicles are similar in that they have thus far not been found for any export customers. Regardless, the CV90 is unlikely to go away anytime soon and will continue to be modified for each nation that uses it and also their individual needs. The last one is the Tiran V/SH, which is an Israeli modification of the Soviet T-55 main battle tank. The biggest modification that the vehicle has compared to the standard T-55 was it's got its 100mm replaced with a 105mm Sharia gun. Other modifications included modified ammo racks, new communication equipment, a modified driver's hatch that can be opened from the outside, a 7.62mm Browning coaxial machine gun, a cupola-mounted 12.7mm Browning heavy machine gun, and a new fire control system with night vision equipment. During the Six-Day War of 1967, the Israeli Defense Forces managed to capture some T-55s from the Syrians and Egyptians and put them into service with the IDF Armored Corps, and designated the captured T-55s as the Tiran 5s. Some of the Tiran 5s were later modified to mount the 105mm Sharia, and these were designated the Tiran 5SHs. Reserve units of the IDF operated the Tiran 5 until the early 1990s, but most Tiran 5s were sold to the Third World countries, and the rest were modified into the Agzarit heavy armored personnel carrier. It's definitely an interesting vehicle, and hopefully it can join us soon, along with stuff like the Tiran 6. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Merciless Reaper, Jerry Provolt, Mega Dino King, Professor X1718, Orange Tail, Sakoshi Tiger, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, Moxie, B. Young, and Derek R., Barine, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.